thought you were someone else.
Okay, let's talk about Invincible. I love this series. I loved season 1 so much I literally bought the compendiums and read them all front to back 4 times over. It's one of my favorite comics of all time, and while I don't think the show reaches the same heights, I think it's still a very good adaptation that clearly has a lot of love poured into it. The vocal performances are all top notch, the writing is fantastic, and while the changes that are made for the show compared to the source material are abundant, there's never a moment in the show where I go, wow, that really sucks. That's the most I'm gonna say about that, because I've seen just how heated people get when having any position on how Amber is handled, and you will scare me. It's a very solid adaptation that is very much worth your time, but with the 3rd season finally arriving this week, and people hyping themselves up for a season that doesn't have a 4-month break this time, I've noticed more and more people giving their complaints towards this show's animation. And this is not some isolated incident where a small group of people complain for a few days and then everyone forgets that this course even happened in the first place. No, the majority held opinion when it comes to Invincible is that while everything else about the show is top notch, the animation is widely considered bad or low effort. And that's kinda what I wanted to talk about today, because these exact critiques were also levied at the show's 2nd season when it premiered in November 2023, and to a lesser extent when season 1 first dropped all the way back in 2021. However, these points have come back with a vengeance for season 3 due to people's reactions to the trailers, and seeing that the animation not only hasn't improved a whole lot, but also seems to be a little less polished than usual. If you're a casual viewer, this may not all seem that important to you. In fact, you may think the show looks completely fine, and, well, you wouldn't be wrong about that. But considering just how beloved Invincible is, it's no wonder that fans are responding rather passionately. People naturally want an animated adaptation of a beloved comic series to look good. That being said, I think now is probably a good time to have a balanced discussion about all of this. For this video, I really wanted to dive headfirst into the discussion surrounding Invincible's animation, because while I don't think there's a middle ground here that everyone is going to agree on, I find the reactions people have had to be incredibly interesting, and I also think there's also a lot about this topic that people either don't know about or are just choosing not to acknowledge. From hectic production troubles behind the scenes that have been kept relatively hush-hush, the wild spectrum of reactions people have had, and also looking at just how high people's standards are for animation these days, and asking ourselves, does Invincible really need to look like a masterpiece? The answer to that is no, but it does have its problems, and there are plenty of reasons why the show looks the way it does. Also, side note, while I was making this video, they released a new teaser for season 3 showing Mark lifting a massive CGI object, and I don't think I can emphasize just how fucking bad it looks. Before we begin, I just want to say I will not be talking about the eloquently titled animator trailers with the extremely smooth and clean animation, because I think expecting the entire show to be this expressive all the time is unrealistic. Though I will admit it is really odd that the trailers teasing a new season have better animation than the show itself. Anyway, back on topic. Now, I've had my own thoughts about Invincible's animation since I first watched it back in 2021, and I know I can be a little too nice about things at times, but my stance was always that while the show never looked downright atrocious, it was hard to deny that the show's presentation felt just a little bit stilted and didn't really do the striking artwork of the comics much justice. I can watch Invincible and not be distracted by the animation quality because, comparing it to the majority of Western animated shows from the past and currently airing, it's perfectly serviceable. It never tries to do anything too crazy, and while there are brief moments where there's either an actually decent cut of animation or sliding a JPEG across the screen, it's at least on a consistent level of watchable. Doesn't leave much of an impression, it's just telling the extremely well written story that is there and is fantastic in the most low-key way it can. And this is not exactly a terrible approach, nor do I think the animators are lazy. Seriously, if you non-jokingly blame animators for how any show's animation turns out, then you have no idea how this stuff works. Animators may not get paid much, but they are certainly not paid to be lazy. The animation quality of Invincible is fine. It's incredibly average, which to the average viewer should not be a problem. I think it's easy to forget sometimes with how normalized the internet is compared to 10 or 20 years ago, that the majority of people don't actually pay attention to this kind of stuff, nor do they really care as much as we do. However, even though quality-wise Invincible is nothing to write home about, it's not hard to see why so many people are disappointed with how it looks, and hell, it's not that hard to agree with some of the arguments being made, especially when you compare the visuals of the Amazon show to the source material. Now, I'm gonna have to show some artwork from the comics a second, which naturally contains spoilers for the show. I can't really tell you to skip ahead because this is all important to my argument, so I'm just gonna trust you to close or avert your eyes until I audibly tell you to open them. This is a trust exercise, okay? So anyway, while obviously the earlier parts of the comic book look a little bit rough, Invincible's artwork is incredibly striking. It's not the most mind-blowing stuff you'll see from comics or anything, but the artwork is super slick and helps to really sell the impact of the violence and action. Not to mention, there are still plenty of drop-dead gorgeous panels and pages here that instantly come to mind when you think of a certain scene. I love how Invincible looks, and and naturally fans of a superhero comic with slick artwork and plenty of memorable action sequences would greatly prefer an adaptation that doesn't just offer the bare minimum to be considered acceptable. Okay, you can open your eyes now, trust me. Obviously, nothing I'm about to say is at all meant to be disrespectful towards the artists and animators who worked on Invincible, because believe it or not, I'm not a heartless bastard, and animation is one of the most thankless jobs in the entire world, despite how stressful, time-consuming, and expensive it is. But here's the thing, even though if you see these scenes in Invincible without having read the comic, they might not seem too bad, if you have read the comic, then the show's incredibly basic animation and artwork are understandably disappointing. I get that when reading comics, you do have to leave a lot of the action up to your imagination, as there's still images at the end of the day, but that doesn't mean Invincible should skimp out on these iconic moments. Not that they're trying to do that, we'll get there. I think they should be done more justice. Having a superhero show with lackluster action does kinda suck. Again, the show's presentation is very inoffensive, and I really don't mind how it looks overall, but as a fan of the comics, I can't help but feel just a little disappointed. But judging Invincible and how well it adapts scenes from the comics is one thing. There's a completely different reason that a lot of people use to critique Invincible, and it has a lot to do with how people's standards for animation these days are far higher than they used to be. As said earlier, Invincible is about on par with how the majority of Western animated shows look. Completely fine, not too crazy. But it's not a stretch to say that a lot of the most popular animated shows these days, whether they're Western or overseas, have much better animation than Invincible. In fact, with anime specifically, good animation is sometimes a damn selling point for many. While I don't think for a second Invincible needs to look as good as shit like Rise of the TMNT, Creature Commandos, Demon Slayer, Jujutsu Kaisen, or even X-Men 97, especially not JJK, I love how that show looks, but Mappa are demons, and everyone who has to suffer in that place deserves all of my respect, and you deserve so much better. It's not hard to see why so many people flip their shit when they see how milquetoast Invincible's visuals are. To a lot of people, average animation just isn't good enough, and while I could absolutely write off most of this as people having their standards be set way too high, I won't deny that comparing Invincible, an Amazon-funded show adapting one of the most critically acclaimed comic runs of the 21st century, to even something as simple as My Adventures with Superman, it's a little embarrassing. My Adventures with Superman is also a Western animated show that doesn't look too crazy and has pretty basic art direction, but there's so much more life and movement in the animation compared to Invincible. It's not even that crazy of an improvement, just a little more movement and attention to detail. Hell, Invincible itself proved just how far this stuff can go, because we literally have the Atom Eve special, which, no joke, f***ing annihilates anything seen in Invincible seasons 1 and 2. It's not the craziest action you'll ever see, but there are some genuinely clean cuts of animation here, and it is overall a good looking special. I don't even need every episode of the show to look like this. Again, animation is hard, time consuming, and expensive, but just a little more movement would go a long way. If Invincible had come out back in the mid-2010s, hell, even as late as 2018, I don't think there would be nearly as much backlash towards the animation. But even if I don't agree that the show needs to look like some insane masterpiece that the artists and animators slaved over 24/7, the simple fact is that the standards for animation across the board have indeed risen, and it's not surprising to me that people would react this way, even if I think calling the animation outright terrible is a bit of a stretch. Okay, that's a lot of yapping about why people are mad at how Invincible looks. Now, why exactly does the show look the way it does? Well, aside from some behind the scenes stuff that not everyone is going to know about, it's actually fairly simple. You see, Invincible is big now. It was a well-known property before the show came out, but I don't think Amazon anticipated just how popular the show's first season would be. Pretty much immediately after season 1 ended, Amazon renewed the show for its second and third seasons. Now, a big problem when it comes to TV shows these days, specifically animated ones, is wait times between seasons. Animation takes forever, and because of that, it's become pretty normal to see new seasons of animated shows take 3 or even 4 years to release. And even though, in an ideal world, fans of newly released and popular TV shows would wait patiently for these seasons to be finished, that's just not what happens. People quickly grow impatient, they get frustrated, and interest in the show starts to dwindle. It's a very common cycle that a lot of shows go through, and if a show is unlucky, by the time the new season comes out, it's likely to flop due to people forgetting about the show and moving on to something else. Obviously, some shows are allowed to get away with this. Notoriously, Attack on Titan took 4 years to actually release its second season, and more recently, the final season took nearly 3 entire years to finish airing, with multiple waiting periods. Yet the show still retained its dominant popularity throughout its decade-long runtime, despite how frustrating the wait could be at times. Naturally, I think Amazon wanted to avoid making people wait an absurdly long time for Invincible's next 2 seasons, nor do I think they wanted to risk one of their new biggest hits quickly fizzling out. So if you noticed how badly they market the show, you probably wouldn't get that impression. So while it did take 2 years for Invincible to get a second season, it only took roughly a year for the third season to come out. And with the show being renewed for a 4th season after season 2 finished airing and it now being in production, I think you can see where this is going. In order to make sure Invincible remains popular and relevant every year, Amazon is ensuring that each new season now takes only a year to release. That way, there's a considerably shorter gap between seasons compared to other shows, which keeps the attention of viewers. If you know Invincible is going to come back every year, it's never really going to fade from your memory, and you're not going to lose interest as quickly as if it took 2, 3, or 4 years instead. It keeps a steady yearly stream stream of content that keeps viewers happy and invested for a long period of time, which in turn makes Amazon a ton of money. From a business perspective and from the perspective of the average viewer, this seems like a win-win. Viewers get more Invincible quickly and Amazon gets to make a lot of money. There's just one very obvious problem with this strategy, and that's that pumping out a full season of animated television every year is kind of f***ing insane unless there are corners being cut. Honestly, the fact Invincible looks as okay as it does despite all of this is genuinely a miracle, and you also have to remember that Invincible isn't like every other 8 or 10 episode season of an animated show that releases in the West these days. Each episode of Invincible is around 44 minutes long, double the standard length for most animated shows, so the workload for this 8 episode season of television is actually more like 16 episodes, the equivalent of 16 episodes of animated television being made in 1 to 2 f***ing years. And Invincible isn't exactly the easiest show to have this production pipeline for. Invincible is constantly introducing new characters and locations, which require tons of new backgrounds to be drawn and new characters to animate. This is not an easy show to work on, far from it, so the fact that the animation comes out as well as it does is nothing short of pure witchcraft. Yeah, it's not impressive visually, but considering the pipeline it's being put through, I can't help but admire the effort. Which brings us into the long fabled production issues. Not much is actually known about the issues faced behind the scenes. Infamously, season 2 was split into 2 parts despite only having 8 episodes, with the show taking a 4-month break after episode 4 released. After waiting 2 years for a new season, many people weren't happy that they were only being given a handful of episodes and told to wait even longer for another handful. It was a very controversial decision, and there's a lot of conflicting information about why it was done. However, co-showrunner Simon Rasiopa has gone on record a few times shedding some light on the season 2 split. In an interview with The Hollywood Handle, Rasiopa cited unspecified production issues that he had to talk to Amazon about, and ultimately decided for the best if half of season 2 released in fall 2023 instead of releasing the whole thing at once in spring 2024. This was done mainly to prevent viewers from having to wait even longer for the next season, which I can understand, even though I would have much preferred it if the next season just released all at once. However, there's another interview with Simon from The Direct that takes into account that there were a lot of shows releasing around the same time as the first 4 episodes of season 2, which they didn't want to compete with, I guess, which I can also understand to an extent, but at the same time, Invincible is crazy popular, and I don't think they would have lost out on much by competing with the other shows releasing that winter. While I would have liked to know the extent of these production issues that keep getting brought up, it is quite obvious that Invincible's production is not very smooth, you know, if the animation didn't give that away already. While I have been given more insight that I'm not able to share, I did find this TikTok from someone who worked on the show, and they confirmed that both seasons 2 and 3 and the Atom Eve special were being worked on around the same time.
I was hired as a storyboard revisionist in April of 2022 to work on the Atom Eve special. I was on Team 1, the first team of the Invincible story teams, and that special aired in July of 2023. So that was a little bit over a year turnaround time that we got the episode out on streaming, which is actually a pretty quick turnaround time for an hour-long episode of TV made by a union studio. I know I personally find all the memes and jokes about it taking 2 years hilarious, but I just wanted to be a pedantic, nerdy little weirdo and let you guys know that it actually took only a year and we made 2 seasons at once, so.
Now, working on 2 seasons at the same time is crazy as is, but when you also consider the fact that Amazon wants a new full season out every year, this gets a lot more insane. Critiques about how the finished show turned out aside, this level of quality despite all of this going on is genuinely remarkable. Like, it could have been so much worse. And this is where I'm gonna have to briefly touch on people's reactions to the show's animation and the delays. To be honest, the long and short of it is that I find all the jokes about the show's animation being lackluster to be really funny, and I can understand how they feel. In an ideal world, I would have liked to see an Invincible show that wasn't compromised by the need to release a season every year to stay relevant, and could actually flex its animation a lot more. Given the source material, Invincible deserves an adaptation that does these panels justice. However, there is a spectrum to this, as with anything online, and seeing completely unironic posts attacking the people behind the show for how it looks and for the show being delayed is really disappointing. And I find it especially wild in Invincible's case, because this kind of shit-flinging discourse when it comes to animation has usually just been limited to anime discussions. I remember a time where if a Western animated show had bad or lackluster animation, it was common courtesy to just make fun of it and not try to attack the people behind the f***ing show, especially when it isn't their fault. At the end of the day, just have some bloody class. I know the internet is progressively getting angrier and more miserable, being a jackass is especially rewarded on Twitter and YouTube, but I still find it ridiculous that people can be disappointed with how a show turned out, and their immediate reaction is to blame the people who have very little control in the situation, and not the big companies that manifested said disappointment. Is there a middle ground that can be reached in the situation? I mean, no. There is an easy middle ground option, but to believe in that option you have to do a bunch of your own research, and that just doesn't really happen on the internet. I am of the belief that Invincible is a perfectly fine looking show that doesn't do much to impress or disgust. Visually, I mean. But I still would greatly prefer an adaptation that was allowed to take its time with its animation and really give us something on par with or better than the comics. Also, Jesus Christ, chill out. That's the end of the video. Play Yakuza or something.